Alrighty, welcome to the video lecture on the process of speciation. Alright, so the question that we're really trying to answer in this lecture is how does one species become two? Because even though we've talked about natural selection isn't going to actually cause a new species to occur. It's just going to cause a change within a population. Alright, now does that mean a new species can occur because of it? Yeah, but you need a little bit more than just natural selection for that to happen. Alright, so what we need is something that is considered an isolating mechanism. Alright, so I just want to define real quick speciation, and that's just the formation of a new species. Okay, so for speciation to occur, something called a reproductive isolation must be present. And a reproductive isolation basically is just the separation of a species or a populations so they can no longer interbreed and they evolve into two separate species then. Okay, so if you look at that picture there, and if we start here, if this is time 0, we have one population and they're all interbreeding, they're all passing their genes on. There's no separation of this group at all. But if something occurs that causes reproductive isolation, and this is that reproductive isolation, we don't know what it is yet. There's many different types of reproductive isolation. But what ends up happening is these two separate groups start forming. Alright, even though they were once the same species, they now are reproductively isolated and can no longer pass their genes on. And this is what's eventually down the road going to cause these two species to become so different from each other. I'm sorry, two different groups to be so different from each other that eventually they will become two different species. Okay? So there are lots of different types of reproductive isolation, but I want to point out three major ones. Okay, and if you haven't noticed yet, your note sheet, you're not filling out part 1. That will be in class tomorrow. What you're filling out is the part 2 down there, and basically just defining all those words that need to be defined. All right. So these three words are listed on your note sheets, and they're just different ways that reproductive isolation can happen. So the first one is called behavior isolation, and basically what that means is that there's some sort of behavior or a courtship ritual or a mating situation that occurs that's different in the groups, and that causes a separation of breeding populations. Okay, so I've got these different kind of scenarios that I thought I'd just read to you because I thought it'd be easier for you to understand what that example means. All right, so an example of behavior isolation is the eastern and western meadowlark bird. All right, they're similar birds whose habitats overlap, but members of the two species will not mate with each other, partly because they use different songs to attract mates. Eastern meadowlarks don't respond to the western meadowlark songs, and vice versa. Okay, so the behavior is that song that they sing that attracts the mate. Okay, so at some point in the history of the speciation of these groups, they started singing different songs to attract the mate, and certain females were attracted to one song and other females were attracted to the other song, and they didn't cross each other when it came to mating, and over time they became so reproductively isolated they became two different species, the western and the eastern meadowlark. Okay, and so just think about behaviors that might prevent passing your genes throughout a population. All right. Another type of reproductive isolation is called geographic isolation, and this basically means when two populations are separated by some sort of a geographic barrier. All right. So this could be like a mountain or a newly formed river or something that occurs within the actual physical environment. All right. So here's another example. It's a population of squirrels. So what we have is the Albert squirrel, which lives in the southwest, and about 10,000 years ago a small population became isolated on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. All right, so we have this canyon that basically separated two populations of these squirrels. The squirrels couldn't cross the canyon, meaning they were no longer able to breed with each other, and they were isolated. So over time, since they were reproductively isolated, they changed so much that they were now no longer the same species. Okay, so that's what geographic isolation is called. And then the final one that we're going to talk about is temporal isolation. And this one's a little bit weird, but this is when the reproduction tends to occur at different times within the year with the population, and it therefore causes a separation of some sort of breeding within the groups. Okay, so the example here is think of three similar species of orchids, which are kind of like a flower, and they live in the same rainforest. All right, and each species of flowers lasts only one day and must be pollinated on that day to produce seeds. Okay, and so because the species we have, different species of the orchid blooming on different days, therefore there can't be cross-pollination based on that. Okay, so you can think about flowers blooming at different times. If they bloom on different times, then there can't be cross-pollination within the population because it's such a limited amount of time for the organism to actually breed. You can think about this in animals. Certain animals will breed at certain times of the year and only at certain times of the year. So if you have two separate groups that choose to breed at different times of the year, you're not going to have cross-breeding because of that. Okay? So just to kind of clear this up, I thought I'd give you pictures, and they're not the best pictures because they're off the internet. And I kind of want you to kind of guess at what this picture is indicating, what type of reproductive isolation. So as you can see, we have two groups here that do a different type of dance or a display to kind of attract mates. So we have this group over here that kind of does this wobbly back and forth dance, and for some reason the females are attracted to it. And then we have this other group here that actually stands there pointing its beak up and its wings up, and the females are attracted to that. So this, of course, would be behavior isolation, okay? Because the behavior that the females choose to like is separating. So this female right here will never be attracted to this male's dance or his pointing display or whatever you call this. All right? So this female will never pass her genes or mix her genes with this group. And this female too here will never be attracted to this wobbly dance that this bird is doing, therefore they'll never pass the genes on. And so there's a separation of these two types of preferences. Okay? This one right here is salamanders, and you can see this is kind of like over time. So we have this ancestral population of salamanders. They're all exchanging genes at this point, and as they move down to California, what they come across is, I guess you could say, this range of mountains, and some of the salamanders go this way, some of the salamanders go this way. At this point, they can't cross over and breed with each other. And remember, this is not happening over like a week. This is happening over, thousands of years that it takes them to get down to here. But since there's no ability to, breed with each group because we have this barrier right here, by the time they actually meet back, they're so different that they are no longer the same species and not able to mate. Okay, so hopefully you've guessed by now that this would be geographical isolation. Okay, and then this final one here, we have something called a spring field cricket and a fall field cricket. You can imagine, thousands of years ago there was one species of cricket, and at some point in that cricket's existence, part of the group decided that they would mate in the spring, and part of the group decided they would mate in the fall. I know it's kind of weird to say like crickets deciding, but you kind of get the point. And so over time, we don't. The females who prefer to mate in the spring will never mate with the fall field crickets, and the fall field cricket females will never mate with the spring field. So we have such a huge reproductive isolation that these become two distinct species. So this, of course, is temporal isolation. Okay, and all of these are involved in the process of creating new species. One species, creating two species from one general species. Okay, that's it for now.